What's your F this, I quit story? I used to work at a bowling alley in the cafe kitchen when I was like 19. One particular night, I was the only one in the kitchen during a slammed rush. I get everything out somehow, in a timely manner, clean the kitchen, then go out for a smoke. The GM walks out a minute later and proceeds to ream me, telling me I'm a lazy, no-good piece of S, etc. I finish my smoke, go back in, pull off my uniform shirt and name tag, set it on the cafe counter, and walk out the front door without a word. F you, Paul. I interviewed for a corporate accounting role because the public accounting was much less pay and a lot more hours. Was told in the interview that it was show up between 8 to 9, leave between 4 to 5. There'd be no more working late nights or having to work on weekends, which was great. I took the job, and within 2 months realized they were lying through their teeth. First off, there was absolutely no training on their processes. I was given enough work for 3 people with no direction on how to do it. My manager was so scatterbrained, he could never give me any help when I asked. No one talked for 8 hours a day, and it was just an unbelievably bad work culture. I'd get to work usually at 8:30 and leave at 4:30 while eating lunch at my desk. I came in one day and was told, "Since you're leaving early, I can only hope you're working from home." Then the next week, we're told we have to come in for a full day Saturday because we had New Year's Day off that Monday. My final straw was when I left at 2:30 one day for a doctor's appointment. When I came in the next day, my manager pulled me into the room and said that I didn't have enough accrued PTO to do that, and he was going to dock my pay in a salaried position. Went in the next day, told him it wasn't working out, and put my 2 weeks in. On my last day, he told me I could leave at 11:30, so I did. When I finally got my paycheck, he docked my pay for the remainder of that day. Luckily, the recruiter who got me the job followed up to ask what happened, and I was completely open and honest with her. Apparently, that manager has a very high turnover rate for the position I was in, and the recruiter told me that the CFO was looking into replacing him. I was in the same position for 2 years and was actively looking at other positions within the same company. Bosses knew about it, it was just time for a change, and to advance my career. Great opportunity came up and I was offered the position. However, my current leadership blocked me because I received a promotion 6 months prior. That promotion was literally an automatic email saying, "Congrats, you're now a level 2 instead of a level 1, because I had met my sales attainment and completed all my yearly trainings. Literally an automated email stopped me from getting promoted, and bosses said I had to wait another 18 months. Left that company and went to a competitor doing the same thing for better pay and significantly more support. My boss had my crew and I cut corners on a job. I was fairly new to the position and took what he said as the way it was supposed to get done. Inspectors then came and checked the job because of an unrelated screw-up by another company, and in turn, found out what we had done. Boss then blamed the whole thing on me and denied he ever told me to do it the way it was done. Spent the next 2 days replacing all the previous work to the way it should have been. Boss then told me he was not going to pay me for the days of work, 14 hours each day, because I was fixing my F-ups. All the while during the 2 days getting called an effing idiot and a liar. F you, I quit. I was a new sous chef at a country club. Chef wouldn't let anyone but himself do the ordering. His ordering method was to go over a sheet of paper hanging on the line where people wrote down what we were out of. Not what we were nearly out of, but what we were completely out of. Anytime I'd try to add items that we were close to out of, he'd lose his ish. We were constantly out of things. One day, we had a huge Easter breakfast event. Dippish chef didn't order near enough eggs, and we were out of all sorts of other random items. I was out front making omelets for the members, ran out of eggs, and stood around for 15 minutes waiting for more while the members became increasingly frustrated than angry. Went to the back to see Chef yucking it up with the FOH manager, handed him my apron and told him to pound sand. Was at that job for less than 2 weeks. Waitressing at a small cafe. Owner was also the manager/cook. One day, we were in the weeds getting thrown around left and right, and finally when it slows down, the other line cook messed up. So the owner, who had already had several screaming meltdowns, picks up a plate and throws it right at the server alley. It broke on the wall near my head, so I took off my apron and waddled my pregnant A on home. F that. It closed a few weeks ago, which wasn't surprising. Was volunteering in a local charity shop at the weekend. As it turns out, Most of the non-paid volunteers were conscripted from job seekers or community service or whatever. They had to turn up to get their welfare payments, etc. Anyways, I'd been there for about 6 months. Was hard graft at times, moving sofas around the shop, up and down 3 floors. It was a nice sunny day, and I was taking my lunch break out the back, sitting on a sofa at the loading bay doors in view of a public car park, eating a sandwich with my feet up on the railing. All of a sudden, some woman who I've never seen before starts wagging her finger at me like I'm a naughty kid, then shouting at me in a disgusting tone. "Get up, young man! How dare you!" She kept ranting on. I'm like, who the H is this? She can get effed. Slowly I get up and move inside. Turns out she was the manager. She pissed me off so bad, I didn't really have an issue with what she was asking. It possibly didn't give a good impression. It was the way she was speaking to me that I had a problem with. I think she thought I was the typical conscript who could be abused without recourse, and they had to stay there and take the abuse in order to get their payments. Some customers in the shop heard how she spoke to me, and they backed me up, so I knew I wasn't nuts. Told her she could stick my volunteering, and I got the H out of there. Never went back. Made me think why I should give up my free time to help this bee on a fat salary hit her targets. I doubt she had a charitable bone in her body. I wrote a 2-page letter to complain to the head of the office, but never did send it. Kind of regret that. Many years ago, I worked at a place called Atomic Burrito. I only worked there for 4 days. I was washing dishes and the manager walked by and started yelling at me for using soap. He said soap costs money, and we were just putting the same food back on the pans anyway. I quit right there. Noped the frick out the door. My wife has one. Her boss suddenly became obsessed with bringing in as many new people as possible. Oddly, he seemed to forget about retaining his current workers. Many, like my wife, were very experienced at this point. You would think they'd be considered the most valuable employees of the group. My wife had settled into a nice Monday through Friday schedule, with good hours. Suddenly, her boss pulls her in for a meeting and says, "Most of the new employees can't work nights or weekends due to personal conflicts. I need you to switch to the 1 to 9 schedule and work Saturdays." My wife was caught off guard and responded, "When you hired me, I told you that I had conflicts in the evenings and weekends, and that I wouldn't be able to work within that schedule." The boss got all serious and said, "Listen, I think we've been more than generous and accommodating of your schedule needs. I think it's time for you to show us some of that same flexibility." My wife started crying immediately and stormed back to her desk. She called me and said that she thought she needed to quit, but wanted to make sure she wasn't crazy. After listening to what happened, I said the boss could go to H and she should never look back. She took her free water bottle and never returned. I worked for a company for over a year that was contracted to make deliveries for Amazon. The vans they equipped us with were terribly maintained and fully unequipped to handle the winter weather. I worked with the company through their first winter, which meant sliding all over the road when it was icy and getting stuck constantly every time we had a snow. I never had a major accident, though. I did have 2 or 3 close calls where only minor damage was incurred to the van. I decided to stick it out through the summer, when the weather was obviously much better. All summer long, they promised us that new and better vans were coming. September rolls around, no vans. October, no vans. November, no vans. That month, we got our first real snow. I got back from my route and immediately put in my notice. My boss told me that we would be getting new vans by the end of the year. I told her that was nice and walked away. First job, working at a little barbecue place with a drive-thru. My day off. Manager calls me at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before we open, saying she doesn't feel good and she needs me to open. I rush in and end up working all day. 5 p.m. rolls around. Manager comes in with the owner of the business, who she's dating. They were at the fair all day and completely forgot that they lied to me about her being sick. I bite my tongue and ask if I can go home. They say no and keep me until close, 9 p.m. At 9 p.m., I took my shirt off, handed them the keys, and said, "Today was my last day," as I walked out the door shirtless. Best part, when I got home, my dad was pissed that I quit my job. I told him what they did and said I wasn't making enough money. He looked at my pay stubs and saw they hadn't been paying me for overtime the entire time that I worked there. He made me go back in and demand my overtime pay. When I came in with the pay stubs, the manager started crying and gave me cash out of the register to cover my overtime and then some. They called me the next day, making sure I wasn't going to report them to the Better Business Bureau. I didn't, but my dad did. Was at a job for 3 years, consistently in the top 3 of my department in terms of performance. asked my supervisor repeatedly if I could be recommended for advancement or promotion, and he always told me he was trying his best to get me new opportunities. Found out from a friend in a different department that I'd been considered a top candidate for 4 different promotions, and each time my supervisor had blocked it. When I confronted him with this information, he told me it was true, and he did it because I could never find someone who does what you do without paying them a lot more. Internally, I said, F this. I quit and found a new job within 3 months. Took all my PTO, and on the day I came back, I quit 2 hours into the day, leaving him high and dry at peak time. F that dude. Summer job in a downtown, scuzzy part of the city, retail store, repainting the wooden fence around the parking lot. The fence wood was a pattern, so on an angle you could see through it. I was painting the one side, and a guy walked up on the other side and started pissing on the other side. A stream of piss almost on my head. I yelled and said, "Get the H out of here." He continued to piss and then dropped to squat for a number 2. Got up, packed up the paintbrush and paint, went inside for a break. Boss said, "What are you doing? The fence is not done." I said, "You don't pay me enough to get pissed on." Started dating a guy that one of my coworkers liked. He was a regular customer. She started doing things like spitting in his food, telling my boss I wasn't working, writing her name on the checklist of our side of work, and acting like she did everything and I did nothing. Then she stole $100 from my drawer, and the boss wanted me to pay for it. Didn't believe me because she was friends with the girl. I walked out on the spot. Like a couple months later, they caught her stealing again on camera and fired her. Also, the guy's now my husband. I worked at a movie theater for about 2 years when Star Wars 7 came out, which was hectic enough, but we also have to work holidays there. So I was working on Christmas Day when I was informed via radio that one of the theaters had a mess to be cleaned. When I arrived, I found a pile of a grown man's ish on the ground. I put down my broom and walked out. I never even told them why I left. Didn't feel like I needed to justify that. I used to work for a big blue home improvement store in the paint department. Not the worst job in the world, but management was ish. I just so happened to be getting married later in the year, so about 6 months beforehand, I put in my request for leave per the store manager's instructions. I got no response from them and just figured I would be fine, right? It came down to about a week before I was supposed to be married and go on my honeymoon, and I went to double check that my leave had been approved. I was told that it hadn't been approved and that I was scheduled to work most days that I had requested off. I begged my case that I had put in my request for leave and followed all the proper channels, and was informed that they couldn't give me the time off because the manager of my department had requested off and it goes by seniority. I asked what would happen if I didn't show up, since I would be out of the country for my honeymoon, and was told that I would be fired and blacklisted from ever working for the company again. I told them I'd save them the trouble, and walked out right then and there. Working in a fast food restaurant, 3 people working. In the middle of the kitchen floor, as in sitting on the floor of the tiny kitchen, was the 55-year-old owner, playing Candy Crush on full volume. This went on for 30 minutes while everyone is running around him. At the end of the shift, the tip jar was mysteriously empty. Those 3 didn't come back the next day. Pizza Hut. It was okay at first until they hired a newly minted 23-year-old MBA manager who acted like a guard at a prison camp. Messed with the breaks, water, scheduling, and had general contempt for us. There was a huge local event going on, and I was scheduled to work, and somebody had called out and the line was out the door. I show up, and he starts going off on me about the other staff and tells me, "You're lucky you showed up on time, or else I would have fired you on the spot." I was like, "Okay," and stared at him. "You can't take any breaks today because we're busy, and you'll have to work a double." I was like, "Okay," and stared at him. Smiled, walked out.